in 1990, I had a roommate named John Michael Harrington. And John Michael Harrington worked at GMHC. And I would come home every day crying. And he was like, what is wrong? I was like, I'm tired of just going to the hospital every single day and somebody dying. I was just tired. I was emotionally drained. And I said, all my ballroom friends are dying and nobody's doing anything about it. This is in 1990. This is in the spring of 1990. And he said, well, what would you like for me to do? He was like, I said, I don't know. He said, come up to GMHC and let's talk with some people, you know? And I said, because the ballroom people are not being looked at. My Black and Latino people are not being looked at for services and care. And I started to know, because I knew people of non-color who were getting care and finding doctors and good doctors and sometimes getting nice apartments and getting all these things, but my Black and Latino people.
Oh, but it's also because at that time, media, they only show pretty much white folks dying of AIDS or living with AIDS, but they would never show folks of color. And I think that's why a lot of us thought, oh, that can't happen to us because it's happening to them. So that was also something that was happening on top of stigma and all the other things that we were going through. So
yes. And so once he did, so when I came to GMHC, I sat down and I came with my best friend, Charles Armani, who was Charles Balenciaga, and we sat down with Arbit and Torrance and Krishna, and Krishna is still there.
30 years.
Yes, and we sat down, and it was like, well, you know, what do you want to do? But they had already had conversations about wanting to do something with the ballroom community, but they didn't know how. They're a white bread organization. They can't just come up into ballroom, you know what I'm saying, and be like, oh, we're here, we're going to help. So I said, what do you want to do? And so we sat down for weeks and months and tried to narrow down something. And it was like, we said, well, let's start a project and let's call it, so what will you name it? And we came up with all these crazy names. And I said, the most visible name was basically Latex, because that's the thing about condom and protection. And it was like, well, let's call it the House of Latex Project. And so I said, yes. So how are we going to get into ballroom? It was like, Derek, you're somebody that's known and respected. We just can't come into a ballroom and say, we're here with condoms and this and the other. And so I'm be real with you. So I asked a couple of people who were giving balls during that year. And they was like, no, we're not letting them come in here. No, we're not doing that. And and also too, because of the stigma. Like, why would this agency be here? Are they trying to come here and expose people? All of these questions, like this was the questions that was being asked to me. Like, why would you, they felt so disrespected. Why do you want this agency? Why do you want Jimmy Simmons condoms? All like that. They felt like, because there was so much stigma, because again, like you said, brother, it wasn't talked about. It wasn't until the House of Chanel ball in 1990. And I went to Kenny and I said, can I have GMAC table? And Kenny said, sure. And they came there, they set up a little table in the back of the ballroom and condoms and pamphlets and stuff like that. And people would take the condoms without anybody seeing. You know, it was like, they wouldn't know anything, because if you took a condom, that means that something was wrong if you were trying to protect yourself because you had something.
The opposite.
It was, and it was crazy. And that's what set up GMAC as a project, the House of Latex being at balls. And so then once some people saw them, like, oh, okay. They didn't speak to the ballroom people. They didn't talk. They was just there. Questions needed to be asked and this and the other. They was at the next ball. Now we're going into next ball, then the next ball, and the next ball. By 1993, those people, like all those people that was part of the project, said, we can't just sit here and watch this ball anymore and not want to participate.
But there's a piece too, because early on from 90 to 93, they were also having conversations with leaders from the houses. So because I also remember we would be at Eva Spendova's house and she'll be like, all right, kids, Mama got to go out. And we're like, oh, she probably has a date. But she never told us where she was going, but she was going to GMAC for those meetings. And later I found out that, you know, you, her, and a bunch of other leaders who are part of that conversation, like, how do we work with the community? And so that's part.
And that's where the project started to expand, because now they were inviting houses to come and say, how do you do intervention with your house members?